whose certified designers work to protect occupants through the design of code-compliant and accessible environments. Learn more at cidq.org/NPR.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. We are 10 days into the 2025 hurricane season, and we are being told by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that this could be a difficult one to weather. It isn't just that they are predicting above normal activity in the Atlantic, it is also the cuts being made by the Trump administration to NOAA and the National Weather Service and to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Cuts have been so severe that some forecasters have warned of reduced ability to accurately forecast the track of storms that may make land. And with reductions at FEMA, there are worries about recovery from hurricanes and other natural disasters. This hour, we look at what this hurricane season may hold, weather-wise and otherwise. We're joined by Chip Konrad. He's director of the Southeast Regional Climate Center and professor in the Department of Geography and Environment at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Will McDow is associate vice president for the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Coasts and Watershed Strategic Initiative. And Brad Panovich is chief meteorologist at WCNC TV. Thank you all for being here. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Let me begin with you, Chip. I'm going to start with a potentially embarrassing question. How accurate were predictions about last year's hurricane season?
Well, it was a very interesting year. They were predicting well above normal activity. And in the core of the hurricane season, there weren't hardly any hurricanes. It looked like they were way off. But as we're getting towards the end of the hurricane season, it picked up in a very, very big way, a very unfortunate way, as North Carolinians know, with Hurricane Helene. And so in the end, the forecast was not off by much. It turned out to be a much above normal year, just slightly below what they predicted.
Hurricane Helene strikes me as being very unusual given the amount of damage that it did in the mountains of western North Carolina, Brad. But did anybody predict? Can you predict a hurricane coming up from the Gulf through the mountains and causing that kind of damage? Did anyone predict that?
Well, it's amazing. That storm, from a specific storm standpoint, was actually one of the most well forecasted storms of last season from an accuracy of a track as well as intensity. What made Helene so unique was this event that happened before the storm hit. It's called the predecessor rain event. And we had this heavy rain event 2 to 3 days before the storm made landfall, which kind of set the groundwork for what was the disaster of Helene. And one thing we're learning, and I talk a lot about this recently with a lot of our hurricane preparedness talks, is storms coming up from the Gulf, coming up from Florida, tend to be the most impactful for Western North Carolina because it puts North Carolina, especially the western part of the state, on the eastern flank or the dirty side of the storm. And we tend to see the worst weather. Some of the worst storms we've had in the Charlotte area in the Western Carolinas are from landfalling storms in the panhandle of Florida, from tornadoes to flooding. You think about storms like Faye, Gustav, Ivan, Helene, Fred. I remember Fred, 36 tornado warnings in our area. Those all made landfall on the Gulf Coast in the Florida Panhandle. So we're starting to realize that landfalls there are a bigger impact than landfalls on the Carolina coast for the western part of the state.
Chip, I know you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, Helene was really amazing. I've done a lot of work looking at heavy rain in the southern Appalachians over the years, and I've also looked at heavy rain connected with tropical systems. And I was just absolutely amazed at Helene. And Helene made landfall as a Cat 4, so it was a very strong system. But maybe what stood out most was its size and also its relatively rapid motion. And typically with big systems, they maintain their integrity for a much longer time period as they move inland. And so it was just absolutely a worst case scenario. And as Brad mentioned, the predecessor event occurred the day before, dropped a whole lot of rain, more than saturated the soils. There was already serious flooding with that event. So there were a number of things that came together just to make it really the just about the perfect, unfortunately, the perfect storm. The footprint, the spatial footprint of the heavy rain was just absolutely eye-dropping as well.
Will, you're not here to forecast anything, and that's not your area of expertise. But weather forecasting has become, despite what people make fun of when they say the TV weather guy is always getting it wrong. They're not always getting it wrong, and it's getting better and better and more accurate and more accurate. But that's improved over time because of improving science and techniques and personnel and equipment, and much of that is apparently in jeopardy now with some of these cutbacks brought on by DOGE. How worried are you that reduction in funding for scientific research, for tracking these storms, cutbacks in the workforce at the Weather Service and NOAA will hinder our ability to know what these storms are going to do, where they're going to go, how much rain they're going to drop, how severe the winds will be?
Yeah, it's a real challenge for everybody from, state and local governments to those who are, in the weather trying to help give the alerts coming out. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, does an amazing job collecting everything from sea temperature data to launching weather balloons, the National Weather Service, to give us that information, that kind of information infrastructure that is so essential to help people know what's coming now, but also what's coming in the years ahead. We need to be thinking about this as a hurricane season for 2025, but also what's over the next decade and how we prepare for that next decade of storms to come as the climate continues to change.
Chip, Will just mentioned some of the ways in which forecasters gather information and how they put that information together to predict the path of hurricanes, but also predict the weather in general. Talk to me about why things are getting more accurate, why they have become more accurate in recent years.
Well, there's a couple of factors. I mean, one is that every year we're doing a better and better job with remote sense data, satellites in particular, and algorithms get more sophisticated in estimating the actual state of the atmosphere. And that, of course, is coupled with the weather balloons, which are really critical, that launch instrument packages across the country. And this has been a huge worry because some of those weather balloon launches have not been happening. So we're not getting real data. It's really fortunate that we have the technology and the remote sensing capabilities, that can make up for that. But at the end of the day, we absolutely need a lot of hard data. And I'll say too, just the forecast models, they're much better, say, than what they were 20, 30 years ago. The cone of uncertainty, as it were, as a hurricane's approaching a coast, that cone has gotten more and more narrow over time. And I will say too, NOAA research and also research funded by other entities, we've learned just a lot more about the complexities of hurricanes, the environment around it, and of course we're learning a lot about the complex interactions between anthropogenic climate change and changes in the character of hurricanes.
So a lot of things, Brad, go into being able to accurately forecast the weather, and particularly hurricanes, and we're getting better at it, but we're getting better at it at a time when other things are happening politically that may be making things worse. And I bring that up because there's a meteorologist who's kind of gone viral. He has been forecasting the weather on an NBC affiliate in South Florida for decades, John Morales. I believe he's a friend of yours. And he recently used his 4 minutes of airtime on an evening newscast to tell viewers that he might not be able to accurately predict the path and the area of landfall of storms due to cutbacks at the federal level. I want to play a portion. It's pretty long, too, but I want to play a portion of what he said to his viewers and then get your reaction. This is John Morales.
As you've grown accustomed to my presentations over my 34 years in South Florida newscasts, confidently, I went on TV and I told you it's going to turn. You don't need to worry. And I am here to tell you that I am not sure I can do that this year because of the cuts, the gutting, the sledgehammer attack on science in general, and I could talk about that for a long, long time, and how that is affecting the U.S. Leadership in science over many years, and how we're losing that leadership, and this is a multi-generational impact on science in this country, all right? But specifically, let's talk about the federal government cuts to the National Weather Service and to NOAA. Did you know that Central and South Florida National Weather Service offices are currently basically 20 to 40% understaffed? From Tampa to Key West, including the Miami office, 20 to 40% understaffed. Now, this type of staffing shortage is having impacts across the nation because there's been a nearly 20% reduction in weather balloon launches that carry those radio signs. And what we're starting to see is that the quality of the forecasts is becoming degraded. There's also a chance, because of some of these cuts, that NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft will not be able to fly this year, and with less reconnaissance missions, we may be flying blind. And we may not exactly know how strong a hurricane is before it reaches the coastline.
Brad, what's your reaction to that? Is he wrong? Is he right? Is he alarmist? How would you describe those comments?
I think they're pretty spot on. I mean, that's the biggest concern going into the season, as you heard Chip talk about, is the upper air data from weather balloons. Also, the fact that at the National Hurricane Center, they rely heavily on NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft, not only for current storms, but for future research. I mean, there's a difference between the NOAA aircraft and the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance, which is the Air Force Hurricane Hunters. The NOAA aircraft have Doppler radar in their aircraft. They also collect data that helps improve the modeling going forward. And they also have a third aircraft called a Gulfstream, which does upper air reconnaissance, which the Air Force does not do. And that basically flies around the storm, giving us details on the steering currents, which is one of the most important things on where these storms are going to go. So the lack of the upper air data is a huge, huge problem. The other problem is he hinted at was these local offices. While the local offices aren't responsible for issuing the hurricane track, they are responsible for local watches and warnings that have to do with flooding, storm surge, tornadoes. And that's, like we saw with Helene, became very important because flash flood warnings were issued by the local forecast offices. And those offices being understaffed could really have a huge impact on those local products that come out. So it is something we're concerned about because there's just a lot of unknowns, honestly, Mike. We don't know what type of resources will and will not be there because there's just this level of uncertainty in all of the funding and staffing right now going into the season.
That cut that I played was 1 minute and 36 seconds, and he went on for many more minutes before and after that. He added that the 2025 hurricane season is already unprecedented. Never, he said, never have we faced the combustible mix of a lack of meteorological data and the less accurate forecasts that follow, with an elevated propensity for the rapidly intensifying hurricanes of the man-made climate change era. Has this affected your and your colleagues' forecasting ability yet?
I would say probably not yet, but we're starting to see hints of it, and primarily in the numerical modeling. As Chip pointed out, we've lost a lot of these upper air data. Weather balloons are still, I mean, it seems like ancient technology. It's still one of the most important pieces of data that goes into numerical guidance. In fact, there could be a degradation of 20% without this upper air data and a lot of the numerical guidance. In many cases, if you ask any meteorologist, they would say we need more upper air data, not less, because it's that important to the guidance. We would love to see weather balloons launched everywhere, some kind of automation or drone or some way to replace it, which, let's be honest, there is going to be technology that hopefully will replace it, but it's not there yet.
And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the program as well, the impending arrival of AI and what that might do. We have to take a break. We're coming right back.
On the next Charlotte Talks, last month the House passed Donald Trump's Big Beautiful Bill, which includes tax cuts, Medicaid and food stamp restrictions, border security funding, and more. But the bill is controversial and became a flashpoint in Trump's feud with Elon Musk. As the bill moves to the Senate, we take a closer look at it and how Trump's policies are affecting our state and our state lawmakers. That's tomorrow morning at 9.
I'm Scott Tong. Alexander Skarsgård has been a sexy vampire, rampaging Viking in TV and film. But in the new Apple TV Plus series Murderbot, he plays an AI robot that's antisocial, insecure.
It was very, very exciting to play someone who was incredibly socially awkward and wasn't filled with testosterone and adrenaline.
Next time, Here and Now.
Join us for Here and Now at noon on 90.7 WFAE.
Hi, I'm Manoush Zamarodi. It can feel like the news these days is full of change and uncertainty. But listening to NPR and this station helps make sense of all the headlines. Did you know you can donate your vehicle to help pay for the independent journalism you rely on? Donating your old car, truck, or other vehicle is a great way to sustain public radio in this community. Here's how to get started.
Just go to WFAE.org/cars.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the 2025 hurricane season, in which we are 10 days. Well, I guess that's how you say it. We're 10 days into it so far, and it's predicted to be a pretty tough season. We're talking about this with Brad Panovich, who's the chief meteorologist at WCNC TV. Chip Konrad is the director of the Southeast Regional Climate Center and a professor of geography and environment at UNC Chapel Hill, also a meteorologist. And Will McDow is an associate vice president of the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Coasts and Watersheds Strategic Initiative. Will, you wrote an op-ed piece in the Charlotte Observer expressing concerns remarkably similar to that weather forecaster in South Florida, whose comments we just played, saying that the Trump administration has put the state in much greater peril during hurricane seasons by, quote, systematically dismantling the federal emergency response and disaster preparedness system that has supported Americans for decades, and they have cut programs that protect lives and save taxpayers money when disasters hit. Expand on that.
Yeah, the work that both NOAA and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, do is really geared around protecting Americans in the face of changing climate, more severe weather. We were just talking a minute ago about the likely increasing cone of uncertainty that where is this hurricane going to strike? In an effort to save money by cutting National Weather Service, they're going to cause more people to have to evacuate. That is, people not going to their jobs, people paying for extra hotel rooms. It's going to be cost on the American people. At FEMA, which came under a lot of fire for its reaction during Helene, there's going to be fewer boots on the ground, not more boots on the ground. And there's going to be fewer investments in the solutions that we know work to keep people safe for the decades ahead. So it's real cuts now and real cuts in the future.
This is an example, some would say, of being penny wise and pound foolish, to use an old British expression. But what you're saying here about these evacuations is that if the accuracy of your forecast has decreased because of the cuts you're making over here, that means more people will have to evacuate unnecessarily because you can't say precisely, as we pretty much are beginning to be able to say, you can't say precisely where or when it's going to hit, so everybody has to go. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that is, the real world consequences of less accurate forecasting.
So you work, as I said, for the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Coasts and Watershed Strategic Initiative, and you say that for every dollar spent on resilience efforts, it is estimated that we save $13 in avoided damages and cleanup costs and economic impact. So how have these cutbacks at the federal level affected resilience efforts, and how much more is this likely to cost us?
Yeah, and that figure of $1 invested can save $13 comes from a study by the Chamber of Commerce and others. So this is not an Environmental Defense Fund statistic.
Okay.
One of the programs that's been cut is called the BRIC program, the Building Resilient and Infrastructure Communities program. North Carolina was slated to get $178 million in programs from projects in Gastonia and Salisbury to our coast to invest in protecting water treatment plants, in doing stream restoration and wetlands to hold back more water, to elevate homes and other critical infrastructure. So if you multiply that $178 million by the 13 in cost savings, we're talking $1 billion+ of potential savings in the future. that's being lost by not investing today, being a penny foolish.
And I want to point out that that brick building resistant infrastructure and communities program was something that Donald Trump signed into law in his first term, and now he's ordered FEMA to defund it. Can any of you, and I'll start with you, Will, I'd like to hear from all of you, explain why you would take these actions to decrease weather forecasting ability and accuracy to save a couple of bucks here and there when it's going to cost a fortune down the road if we're wrong, or even if these storms hit and we're not prepared. I'll start with you, Will. Why would Trump switch gears like this?
That's a question hopefully you could ask him one day. But it does seem, not the wisest decision right now. And members of Congress, including some of our Republican delegation, Representative Edwards from North Carolina, has led a congressional effort to try to restore the funding to BRIC. So this is a program that does have bipartisan support, even if this administration doesn't see its value.
Charles, your take on that?
Well, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And we look at North Carolina in particular, and the Southeast in general, we've had a lot more people move into harm's way. And so the vulnerability has gone up a lot. And so it's a worst case scenario with increased vulnerability, with a lot more people, a lot more infrastructure in harm's way, coupled with climate change and with there being more stronger hurricanes.
Some of these cuts, Brad, were done by DOJ radically and erratically. Some were, as the BRIC program, evidently, Donald Trump directed FEMA to defund something called BRIC. It is not something that Elon Musk necessarily did on his own. But the buck stops at the top, no matter who did it. Do you understand? Is he being misguided? Is he being misdirected? Are people giving him incorrect information that have led him to reach these conclusions? What's behind all of this?
That's a great question. Since I've been in meteorology, there has always been a lack of funding for NOAA and the National Weather Service. It feels like it's always scrambling for money. And in many cases, going into this administration, we were already short like several hundred forecasters. So we were already in peril before we got to this point. And to me, I never really understood it because we talk about dollar to dollar. The National Weather Service, what it provides is probably the most valuable use of taxpayer money that we have in our government. Well, it is just everybody uses it. But I think the problem, Mike, and this goes back to the reason I'm in broadcast meteorology is because this happened to me graduating from college. There was a hiring freeze in NOAA when I graduated from college because it feels like every time there's a push to cut funding, the fact that, and I know why it is, the fact that NOAA is in the Department of Commerce sometimes makes it get caught up in funding cuts because politicians don't understand what's in the Department of Commerce. Weather data is vital to our commerce and our economy, but because it's in that department, I think oftentimes it gets caught up in these budget cuts unknowingly by many politicians. And I know there's a lot of bipartisan support to try to move what NOAA and the National Weather Service does more into like Homeland Security or national defense, making it a vital part of our government, because then it would keep it away from these cuts. Because if you think about it, if you're going to Washington and you've got to cut funding, you just see Department of Commerce. You don't always think what's in that department, and you start making cuts. And so this has happened in the past, and this is just a really extreme example of what's been happening in past administrations, to be honest with you.
There's also a thrust to privatize a lot of the things that we have come to regard as government services, and that includes prisons. It also includes weather forecasting. And we do have examples of private weather forecasting services cropping up. AccuWeather, I believe, is the largest private weather forecasting service in the world. Why do we need the National Weather Service? Why does the government, why do taxpayers have to fund this when private companies could spring up and serve us effectively? It's a dumb question. I'm asking it, and I know I'm going to get an answer. So go ahead, Brad. Tell me why we need them.
I'll tell you why. We are very lucky in the United States. We have democratized weather data. Everybody has access to this data. It should not go to the highest bidder, or a tornado warning doesn't go to somebody who pays versus doesn't pay. Everybody should have access because it benefits everybody. The other thing from a private industry standpoint, there's no way a private company could afford to spend money on satellites, on the infrastructure it would take to collect this data. On top of that, they would assume a lot of liability that I don't think a private company would want in issuing warnings, watches, advisories. So in many ways, it's great that the government provides this data for free, and companies like AccuWeather use that data, repackage it, and make money off of taxpayer money that's already out there for free. So I don't ever see a scenario where we should pay a private company for weather information. It should go to everybody because it's a great use of our tax dollars.
And a couple of years ago, we did an hour on this. Weather forecasting is not just the National Weather Service. It is an international cooperative effort. That's why when we see these, particularly during hurricane season, and we see these forecast models pop up on our television screen, some of them are the, quote, European, end quote, model, and that's because it's coming from European forecasting organizations. Chip, you run the Southeast Regional Climate Center. So we have all these things. We have NOAA, we have the National Weather Service, now we have the Southeast Regional Climate Center. What exactly does your organization do, and how affected, if at all, will you be by these cuts?
Well, we weren't refunded. We were going into the last year of our contract, and and it wasn't signed, and so we had to stop our services. And there was a big outcry, particularly from media sources, because our tools take a lot of complex weather and climate information and put it into forms that are very useful, especially a tool called Climate Perspectives that we use. And so a lot of the media stories came out, and our funding was restored there. But there's a whole lot of different functions that are carried out by entities within NOAA that really help people out. And I will especially speak to people that are underserved, and we have quite a few of those in North Carolina. A lot of work is required to get warnings out. There's also different types of vulnerability depending on the type of extreme weather. NOAA's been doing a lot of research on this. At the end of the day, it's all about saving lives, and it's a very complicated business, and it requires a big investment across a wide range of areas.
Yeah, saving lives and minimizing property damage, which is costing people a fortune and causing insurance rates to rise for everyone in the country, et cetera, and increasing costs for housing and so forth. But let me ask you this, Chip, because we do have NOAA, we have the National Weather Service, we have these European forecasting organizations that participate at least in our hurricane forecasting and maybe other aspects of our daily forecast that have nothing to do with hurricanes. And we have your organization, the Southeast Regional Climate Center. How badly damaged would we be if the National Weather Service couldn't do what they have been doing in the last several years?
Well, it's hard to imagine they're not, well, in the worst case scenario, the National Weather Service going away and the whole thing privatized. But I would see a huge degradation in our forecasting abilities. I could see in a worst case scenario too, people have to pay to get data, and then that data is not equitably distributed, so that we don't have forecasts and we don't have warnings out there again to people who have a harder time getting those warnings. It's just hard to imagine that happening.
Will McDow.
Mike, you mentioned insurance just a second ago, and I think the connection between the data that's collected by NOAA and the National Weather Service and how insurance rates are set is a really critical linkage that most folks don't understand. I know that insurance rates are already going up across North Carolina, across the country. And if insurance companies don't have that accurate information, they're going to have to err on the side of being the most conservative, which means the higher end of the rates. And so this is not just a health and safety, this is an economic issue for all homeowners across the state.
Which is something policymakers should recognize and probably will at some point when people start complaining about this, if they can connect the dots to what's going on. Chip, NOAA predicts a 30% chance of a near normal hurricane season this hurricane season. They predict a 60% chance of an above normal season and a 10% chance of a below normal season. I watch weather newscasts on television all the time, and they talk about 10% chance of rain or a 50% chance of rain, and that does not mean that we have a 50-50 chance of rain. It means something totally different. So do these forecasts for the 10% below normal, 30% near normal, 60% over normal chance of hurricanes, is that similar in terms of what it actually means?
Well, I mean, everything that we give in a forecast, it's implicitly, it is probabilistic. We can't say 100% that something's going to happen or not going to happen. It's going to be a distribution there in terms of probability. And for this year, they're predicting above normal. And it's complicated. It's not just that we have the unusually warm seas. We have other things going on. We're in what we call an ENSO neutral period. And we also have a stronger, they're predicting a stronger East African monsoon. There's all these different factors that go into it. And so it's far from being a perfect science. But what I always tell people is that even if they were predicting below normal, you absolutely need to be prepared. And we had one year, in 1992, it was a well below normal year. They had an El Nino going on, which inhibits hurricane activity. And we had Andrew hit South Florida as a Cat 5, catastrophic damage, a lot of loss of life. Then made a second landfall in Louisiana. So it's absolutely horrible. And so people they absolutely need to be prepared, maximum prepared, no matter what this forecast says.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off because we're suddenly getting a lot of stuttering with your audio because you're talking to us from a motel room where the Wi-Fi is probably not supreme. Brad, NOAA is predicting 13 to 19 named storms with winds higher than 39 miles per hour and 6 to 10 that will become hurricanes and are expressing a 70% confidence in their predictions. What does that tell you?
Well, I think Chip made a good point, and I preach this all the time. The hurricane season forecast is the number of storms in the entire Atlantic basin. It doesn't always tell us where they're going to go or oftentimes how strong they're going to be. But the more storms you have, the higher the probability of getting hit. It's like buying more raffle tickets for a raffle. Unfortunately, it's a raffle you don't want to win. So it increases your probabilities. Now, I use 1992 all the time. He mentioned Andrew, right? Mike, in that season, there were only 7 storms, 7 named storms the entire season, but one of them was Hurricane Andrew. There's not a single person in South Florida or Southeast Louisiana would tell you 1992 was a good season because they got hit by Andrew. So it takes one storm. For us in the Carolinas, think about if we had a season where just Hugo hit or Helene hit, it's a bad season. So as Chip was talking about, it only takes one storm and you need to be prepared. But when there's a higher probability of the number of storms, it means you have to have your guard up even higher because it's not one and done. There could be multiple storms that impact you.
And Evan, I think I heard this correctly the other day that we are off to a slow start, although we do have our first named hurricane in the Pacific off the coast of Southern California and the Yucatan Peninsula. I have 15 seconds, Brad. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think often early in the season, we get to this point, like we haven't seen a storm yet. Remember, even though the season starts on June 1st, from August 1st to the end of the season, 87% of all storms occur in that time frame. So after August is when things ramp up.
Coming up in 20 minutes, according to a recent study, only 14% of vapes on the market in 2024 were authorized by the government. And while the U.S. regulatory system is struggling to play catch-up, the United Kingdom is taking action. As of June 1st, the country banned all disposable e-cigarettes. Coming up on 1A at 10 o'clock, we get the latest on vaping regulations and research, both abroad and here at home.
This is Ari Shapiro with NPR. People collect all sorts of things. Stamps, antique lamps, sports memorabilia. If you happen to collect cars and you're looking to make room for some new additions, look no further than this station. Pickup is free and you're helping make your favorite NPR programs possible. Learn more about it on this station's website, and thank you in advance for thinking about helping public radio.
It's easy. Pickup is free and your car could be worth hundreds. Visit WFAE.org/cars today.
Support comes from WFAE listeners and the Southern Environmental Law Center, dedicated to finding solutions to the toughest environmental challenges starting here in the South. More information about how SELC is working to make a difference here in North Carolina and beyond at southernenvironment.org. And Bodyworks Plus, a luxury car collision center including repairs on electric vehicles, serving the community since 1998 at West 24th Street near Camp North End. BodyWorksPlus.com.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the upcoming hurricane season, which we are 10 days into, with the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicting with 70% reliability, they believe, that we will have a 60% chance of an above normal season. And as Brad Panovich, meteorologist from WCNC TV, just pointed out, that even though we're off to a slow start, 80% of the hurricanes happen after August the 1st, between that and the end of the hurricane season in December. He's here along with Chip Konrad, director of the Southeast Regional Climate Center at UNC Chapel Hill, and Will McDow, associate vice president of the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Coasts and Watershed Strategic Initiative. We've been talking about the money. They're making cutbacks to NOAA and to the National Weather Service because they want to save money. But there's money involved in repairing and cleaning up after storms, and not being prepared will cost us even more money. I understand that stronger weather storms are increasing water quality concerns along the coast, and of course maintaining that water quality costs money. But WRAL-TV reports that the amount of money that this state will need to spend just on Helene-related road repairs, fixing bridges and things like that, are the equivalent to 3 years' worth of the state's budget for doing that, and 18 months' worth of work repaving roads. And it is already causing the state to divert money from other already planned for projects to pay for those repairs. Are some of those funds coming from water quality preservation projects?
Yeah, before I answer that, if I could go back real quick, I think the point about forecasting and storms hitting from Texas through Florida and up the Atlantic is one of the reasons why we really need to be thinking about a federal response as well as state and local responses. We don't know where these storms are going to hit, and if every state had to prepare at the level of the federal government, it would be a huge waste of taxpayer dollars in all of those states. Coming to North Carolina and the budget situation here, another reason why we really need a strong federal response to help support the state in doing the repairs that are necessary to get people back on the roads, which is critical for them getting to their jobs, to seeing their loved ones, and to evacuating if we have another storm. I can't speak exactly to where those dollars are coming from. Those discussions are happening right now as our legislature is discussing this year's state budget. But it is clear that we have had in North Carolina a strong rainy day fund, money that's been put aside by the legislature to support these types of activities. There are discussions right now in Raleigh about how big the next tax cut would be and what other types of critical infrastructure and education and healthcare expenses are needed. And all of that's going to put pressure on that rainy day fund and the investments that are needed to recover from future storms.
And it appears that there are people within the Trump administration, including Donald Trump himself, who would like to push more of this responsibility to the states and away from the federal government. And it appears that maybe states can't afford it, that we need the collective funding of the federal government. When asked about this change in policy, Will, Aaron Sikorsky, who is the director of the Center for Climate and Security, said, quote, "You can't fix what you can't measure. And if we lose information about I should back up. They have stopped reporting on the cost. It's no longer government policy to report on the cost of these big storms that cause more than $1 billion in damage. They're not going to report it anymore. And this fella, Aaron Sikorsky, says that you can't fix what you can't measure. And if we lose this information about the costs associated with these disasters, we don't know what risks climate is posing to our country, given the drill, baby, drill approach of the Trump administration and what he promised during the campaign. This sounds deliberate to me. Is ignorance bliss, Will, or merely ignorant?
I would say it's dangerous. It is dangerous for the American people. It's dangerous for our economy. The billion-dollar disasters figure that you just mentioned is something that's been recorded by the federal government since 1980. In the 80s, we had less than $5 billion disasters a year. Over the last 10 years, we've had 16 or more billion-dollar disasters every year. Clearly, the climate is changing, and that climate is hitting our infrastructure that was designed for the last century and not the next century. And so we need to rethink the infrastructure, how we put natural infrastructure, wetlands, and streams on the landscape, where we put houses and businesses, and take into account climate change so that we know what's coming for the future.
And part of the reason that things are more expensive, that these billion-dollar storms occur, is because storms are bigger, stronger, wetter, more violent than they used to be. They're more frequent than they used to be, and things are more expensive than they used to be. And with tariffs, things are going to be even more expensive than they used to be. In May, Chip, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick accurately said that NOAA and the National Weather Service are using the most advanced weather models and cutting-edge hurricane tracking systems to provide Americans with real-time storm forecasts and warnings, and that as a result, he said, we have never been more prepared for hurricane season. That was in May. They've been cutting all during the first 5 months of this administration. In your mind, are those comments true? Are they still true, given the cutbacks that we've been talking about?
Well, it's absolutely not true. Our most critical resource in NOAA is the human resources we have and the expertise. And very sadly, when there was the downsizing of the National Weather Service, a lot of the senior people left and took retirement, early retirement, or whatever. And there's just years and years of expertise that went away there immediately. And while the models have gotten better and our forecasts are getting more skillful, at the end of the day, we need people to interrogate those models. There's multiple models, the European, the American, and there's subtle differences between them. And a really experienced forecaster can really have some discernment there and know when to lean on maybe more on one model versus another model. And so that has really gone away. There's just no bypass around having the expertise there to interrogate all this wonderful information that we have coming in.
And you have said that cuts to the National Weather Service are just, quote, otherworldly and don't make sense. And you told WECT TV that what you see ahead is a, quote, really scary future because we need to have effective forecasts. You cannot be alone in that opinion. Is that getting back to the Trump administration? Are they listening? Are they willing to be reasonable and change course in your mind?
I don't know. I'm not hopeful, but I mean, I will say one encouraging bit is I understand that there's a move afoot here to bring back some critical vacancies in the National Weather Service. I read a number of 126, which wouldn't begin to backfill, what we've lost. And also, as I mentioned, we've had a number of retirements. So there's no way we're going to be able to get that back. And yeah, and so I'm really worried about this upcoming hurricane season. I'll mention one other thing as well, and that's the fact that fatigue sets in more and more, that every week, every month that goes, the Weather Service office being understaffed, the harder it is. And from what I've been able to see to this point, they've been able to do double shifts. They've been able to do what it takes, particularly when the dangerous weather system around, to backfill. But they're not going to be able to do this for much longer. And so I would see that if things don't change back to where they were before, we could see a serious degradation in forecasts. And there's potential for a lot of loss of life, particularly if we get another storm that moves inland like Helene did.
NPR confirms what Chip just said, Brad, that the National Weather Service has begun the process of hiring at least 100 employees, maybe as many as 126, to, quote, stabilize operations at its field offices across the country. They are rehiring meteorologists and hydrologists and physical scientists and electronic technicians because they are realizing that they are understaffed, and there are some places where these field offices are not staffed 24/7. What's the impact of that?
I think that's huge. Chip hit on a very good point. I have a lot of friends in the National Weather Service, and if for folks out there listening that don't understand, they do shift work. They work 24 hours a day, overnight, multiple forecasters usually on a shift. And in some offices, there's overnight shifts with no coverage or just one person. Okay. So they're like me. I mean, they love what they do and they want to save lives and property. So they're working hard. The problem is if we get into a high impact event where there's multiple storms or multiple flood and tornado risks, you're overworking the people that are still there, and mistakes are going to happen. This is human nature. People are going to make mistakes. The other thing that happens is because the focus is on these high impact events, other services like aviation forecasting or decision support services, or things that skywarn training, even damage surveys for tornadoes, they have to pull back from something to work on these higher impact events. So you degrade other services that other people rely on that maybe aren't as high impact as the severe weather, but it ends up trickling down to everybody. And so I think overworking the staff that is there is a huge problem, because as I mentioned, once you get to August, if we get multiple storms, I think that's where you start stress testing a lot of these local offices to see if one person on staff or multiple people can work 24 hours a day for so many days before they just get burned out.
It sounds analogous to what's been talked about with regard to air traffic controllers to a certain degree. When you take all of the things that we've been talking about, the cutbacks in personnel, the decision not to fly as many weather balloons and things like that, and you add to that something that you and your fellow television meteorologists in Charlotte have been talking about for years now: the lack of local weather radar. Our radar comes out of Greer, South Carolina, which is between, I think, Greenville and Spartanburg. It's a long way away. We would be more accurate if we, Charlotte, had a radar. And now we have these other cutbacks. What do you see as the greatest impact to you and your ability to accurately predict storms and weather? Is it the lack of radar? Is it all the other things we've been talking about? Is it the combination of all the things we've been talking about?
It's a little bit of everything. Even if I didn't rely on a single person at the National Weather Service, I rely on their data. Okay. That data is vital. I can't do my job without NOAA data. We can't do it without the radar data. So every time, like, Chip's organization, he's right. The Southeast Regional Climate Center, I use the perspectives all the time because it allows me to show in a easy to understand way how our climate is changing or how to put things in perspective, because we have a lot of transplants to the Carolinas. They don't know what a normal climate looks like here. They think what's happening now is normal. So you have to put it in perspective. It's also the reason why I'm worried about some of these cutbacks, because people are moving here. You mentioned, the $1 billion disaster thing. It's just not the storms are getting stronger, more frequent. People are moving to more vulnerable regions of the country and putting more infrastructure at risk. There's more stuff to break. So as people move to these climate sensitive areas, like here in the Carolinas, especially the coastal sections, it puts more people at risk. So I really worry about that affecting what we do and not being able to get the information out to people in a timely manner. Because at the end of the day, we all just want to keep people safe. And I think that's the mission of every National Weather Service employee. And that's the only reason some of this is still working right now, is because the dedication and passion of the people that are still there working hard.
Will.
Mike, I would add, one of the ideologies, I think, of these cuts is to give more power back to people, which actually means more responsibility, that people have to kind of go and find the information for themselves. I would commend First Street Foundation, who has something called Flood Factor, that you can go look at their website and see what the flood risk is for where you live, and really make decisions of, do I need flood insurance? Do I need other ways to protect myself in these cuts? I also want to just quickly finish with, there are changes that are needed. There are conversations about changes, but throwing the whole system out before you build the new system is not the right way to go. Congress is having these conversations. Those are our elected representatives. And I think we can have some conversations there as well to hold the line against some of these dangerous cuts.
We have a question from a listener that's been sitting here for 30 minutes, and I think I'm going to ask it. Why is weather so political? Climate change is certainly political, and weather is a subset of climate change. Is it because of the vast amounts of money being funneled into political war chests by the oil industry? Is that what makes this political, or is it simple ideology?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, weather is a billion, I mean, it's $1 trillion industry. And when we talk about climate change, it affects weather in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. And a lot of cases, just in our natural weather climate regime, we have extreme events. We've always had them. We're going to have them in the future. Climate change is changing the mix of that and leaning it more to more extremes there. And that means huge investments are needed in infrastructure and making people more resilient. And we need to be reducing our carbon footprint. Anyway, these are huge economic costs. So that's why I think it's political.
Brad, I have about a minute left. Weather balloons seem like antiquated technology. Drones do not. Drones are becoming more and more prolific in all aspects of this, and artificial intelligence is also beginning to emerge as something that might be meaningful in almost every walk of life. Do you see it helping you and other forecasters in their forecasting efforts?
Well, here's the thing. It already is. I mean, I think it's funny. AI is the new catchphrase, but machine learning in our model guidance has actually been around a lot longer than people think. We've been using machine learning to recreate past atmospheres and past climates to try to forecast the future. So AI is huge, but you still need to collect the data. That's the important thing. No model is perfect unless you have good data. If you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out of these models. And if you've ever used ChatGPT, sometimes it's not great information coming out there. Sometimes it has hallucinations, it has issues. So collecting the data is important. But you heard, I think Will and Chip both mentioned this. We can't get to that point right now until we get those technologies on the table. So we can't throw everything out right now. It'd be like getting rid of a fire station while you're building a new one. You still need fire stations until you get the new one built.
Brad Panovich is Chief Meteorologist at WCNC TV. Will McDow is Associate VP of the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Coast and Watershed Strategic Initiative, and Chip Konrad was with us as well.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer is Gabe Altieri. The senior producer is Sarah D'Elia. Our producer is Chris Jones. For more information about Charlotte Talks, to listen to past episodes, or to subscribe to the Charlotte Talks podcast, visit WFAE.org/Charlotte Talks. Additional support for WFAE programming comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Will Charlotte ever actually build new light rail lines and bus lanes? How will we pay for them? Are more toll lanes coming to our highways? And does anyone still ride those e-scooters? The Transit Time newsletter from